They laughed when he rolled up his sleeve in court. The tattoo on his arm wasn't flashy, it wasn't even particularly artistic, just a simple ink mark that seemed almost childish to those who mocked him. But what none of them knew was the meaning behind it. That tattoo carried a history of sacrifice, courage, and honor. And when the judge saw it, everything in the courtroom shifted. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show some love to them, because this story will touch your heart in ways you didn't expect. He walked into the courthouse with his head held high, though his clothes were simple and his appearance unassuming. His name was Michael Turner, a 37-year-old mechanic from a small Midwestern town. To the crowd gathered in the gallery that day, he didn't look like the type of man who could command a room, let alone sway a judge. He was facing charges he swore were unjust, accused of starting a fight he claimed he tried to break up. It was one of those messy situations where bystanders and quick assumptions had painted him as the aggressor. Michael knew the odds weren't in his favor. He didn't have expensive lawyers or influential friends. All he had was his truth, his dignity, and one tattoo on his left arm, a tattoo that told a story deeper than any words he could have spoken. It was small, just a symbol most people wouldn't even recognize, and yet to Michael it represented everything: his past, his family, his service. But as he sat in that courtroom, waiting for the judge to enter, whispers started echoing from the other side. "Look at that thing," one man sneered, pointing when Michael rolled up his sleeve to adjust his shirt. "What kind of grown man walks around with something like that inked on him?" Laughter rippled across the rows. Even one of the opposing attorneys chuckled under his breath. Michael's lawyer glanced at him nervously, as if the tattoo might hurt their case more than help. The bailiff banged his gavel, calling for silence, but the damage had been done. Michael's character was already being mocked, dismissed as someone not to be taken seriously. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the tattoo wasn't just ink. It was a memory branded into his skin the day he lost his best friend, Corporal Daniel Hayes, in a desert thousands of miles from home. They had been stationed together overseas, two young men from small towns who leaned on each other to survive the heat, the fear, and the endless waiting. One night, during an ambush, Daniel had thrown himself in front of enemy fire to protect Michael. The next morning, with tears still drying on his cheeks, Michael found a local artist and asked him to etch the unit's emblem into his arm, with Daniel's initials woven into the design. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. It was his promise never to forget. The trial began, witnesses called one by one. Some swore Michael had thrown the first punch outside the bar. Others admitted they hadn't seen clearly. Michael sat quietly, his hands folded, his mind wandering back to nights in the barracks when Daniel would crack jokes just to keep spirits alive. He remembered the dusty smell of the desert, the ringing in his ears after every explosion, and the weight of survivor's guilt that never left him. When it was Michael's turn to testify, he stood, nervous but steady. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Mr. Turner, you say you're a man of integrity. Yet here you are, charged with assault. Tell me, what do you think that tattoo says about you? Doesn't it make you look reckless? Like someone who glamorizes violence?" Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Michael looked down at his arm, the very symbol of loyalty and sacrifice twisted into an accusation. His lawyer objected, but the judge allowed him to answer. Michael raised his head, his voice firm but trembling with emotion. "This tattoo doesn't glorify violence," he said. "It reminds me every single day of the price of peace. My best friend gave his life so I could stand here today. He shielded me when he didn't have to. And when I got back home, I promised I'd live a life worthy of his sacrifice. That's what this tattoo means. Not aggression. Not recklessness. Honor. Loyalty. And love." The room fell silent. The same people who had mocked him now stared wide-eyed, their smirks fading. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, shifted in his seat. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up from behind the bench. His gavel rested on the desk, forgotten. He looked at Michael's tattoo, then at Michael himself. "I recognize that emblem," the judge said softly. "I wore it on my uniform once, many years ago." A stunned hush swept the courtroom. The judge rolled up his own sleeve, revealing the same emblem inked faintly on his skin, faded with age. The entire atmosphere changed in an instant. The prosecutor stammered, trying to redirect, but the judge raised his hand. "Mr. Turner," he said, his voice thick with respect, "you don't need to justify that tattoo to anyone here. Not to me. Not to this court. You've carried more than your share of burdens already." Tears welled up in Michael's eyes, but he held them back. He didn't want pity. He wanted truth. The judge nodded, signaling for the trial to continue, but something had shifted. The jury looked at Michael differently now. He wasn't just another defendant in a courtroom, he was a man who had given, and lost, more than most of them could imagine. As the case dragged on, new evidence emerged. A grainy security camera video surfaced, showing clearly that Michael hadn't thrown the first punch. In fact, he had stepped between two men to stop the fight. The so-called witnesses who accused him began to falter under cross-examination. The truth Michael had been waiting for finally started to shine through. But the twists didn't stop there. The man who had originally accused Michael of assault turned out to have his own reason for targeting him. He had a personal grudge. Years ago, Michael had refused to do a dishonest repair job for him at his auto shop, insisting on safety over profit. The man had never forgiven him and saw the bar scuffle as a chance to get revenge. When this revelation hit the courtroom, gasps echoed again. The same people who had mocked Michael's tattoo now whispered apologies under their breath. The jury's faces softened. They weren't looking at a criminal anymore, they were looking at a man wronged. Finally, after days of tension, the verdict came. The foreman stood, his voice steady, "Not guilty." Michael closed his eyes, exhaling the breath he'd been holding for months. His lawyer clapped him on the shoulder, but it was the judge who approached him afterward, something rarely done in that courthouse. "You carry your friend with you," the judge said quietly, his eyes glistening. "Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of that." He extended his hand, a gesture of brotherhood, not just authority. And for the first time in years, Michael felt seen, not as a defendant, not as a broken man, but as someone whose story mattered. Walking out of the courthouse, the sun felt warmer than it had in months. The same people who had laughed at him now parted with nods of respect. Some even clapped. Michael didn't bask in their approval, instead, he touched his tattoo, whispering a quiet thank you to Daniel. He knew this wasn't just his victory, it was theirs. What began as a day of humiliation ended as a powerful reminder that true honor cannot be mocked, and that sometimes the most unlikely symbols carry the deepest meaning. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. And tell me, from which part of the country are you watching this story today?